Outside at 14 minutes past the 8 o'clock hour. Chris Lenois back with you for hour number 3 of the Green Mountain Mornings program on this Tuesday, January the 10th. Welcoming to the studio now, however, for the first time in 2017, Mike Faher, the reporter for so many media outlets, VTDigger, Reformer, and The Commons. Is that right? First time in 2017,
That's
Mike?
right.
Well, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you.
All right. Kind of similar to the old year as far as some of the stories that you're covering. A lot of the big institutions in the area that you've written some stories about in the past week here that people can find in all those different outlets. Let's start with Sonnax up in Bellows Falls and this press release that came out. I got it. You know it's a big deal if I get the press release from the U.S. Labor Department. Looking into violations of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA, as they like to say. Now, this goes back to the whole beginning of the employee stock ownership program for Sonnax, right?
Right, yeah. I believe in early 2011, they became an employee-owned company, and that's really been touted as not only a positive development for them, but I think sort of an example of how this can be done. Peter Welch has visited and sort of praised their ownership model. And really, I don't think we'd heard a bad word about this company until, as you say, last week when the U.S. Department of Labor dropped this on us.
Yeah, indeed. They when I was working at Marlboro and the MBA in Managing for Sustainability had them come in and talk about this ESOP program, this employee stock ownership program. And I know people who work at Sonnax who are very happy as employees to work there. And that doesn't change necessarily because of this story. But really, this has to do with that initial transaction. The two, I guess, principal owners, or they were the sole owners at the time when we're talking about Tommy Kramer and Mr. Fritz. I don't have his first name right in front of me.
Frederick
Fritz.
Tommy Harmon and Frederick Fritz.
Yeah. So what is it exactly that they are being accused of doing?
Well, as I understand it,
I was hoping you could unpack some of the legalese for us.
Yeah, there are still some parts of this that are a little sketchy to me, particularly in regards to the numbers. But as I understand it, they decided they were going to pursue this employee ownership idea, and in order to do that, hired this company, First Bankers Services, out of Illinois. And that company was supposed to essentially represent the employees in this transaction, the employees' stock plan,
right?
And negotiate a fair price for the employees to buy the company. And one of the key allegations here in the Department of Labor lawsuit is that First Bankers did a really lousy job of that, and basically way overpaid by millions the owners of the company, and in doing so, caused financial losses for the employee stock plan.
Yeah, you're talking the federal lawsuit brought by the Department of Labor talks about the shares being sold for $48.8 million, and then new shares issued to the ESOP for just $10 million. So that's a pretty big margin of difference there. Which does that mean that those two that Harmon and Fritz pocketed the difference?
Well, that was my question.
Allegedly, I should say.
And one of the problems I had here is that the Department of Labor wasn't exactly forthcoming when I asked them questions about this. Basically, they kept referring me back to the suit, back to the complaint. And unless you're a banker, and I'm not, some of that, it's just not clear to me whether that we should essentially look at those figures and say that they paid $38 million too much for this company. I don't know that that's the case.
Yeah.
They just kept referring over and over again in that complaint to they overpaid by millions. How many millions? I'm just not sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess in the end, that part of it isn't important. But when I look at some of and you did, I think, a pretty good job doing some research in how they arrived at that sales figure of $48.5 million, it seems to me that when they did the research that they needed, that isn't too far off from some of the experts they spoke to as far as what the value of their stock would be.
So the Mr. Harmon, Mr. Fritz apparently initially thought their company would be worth something like 48, I think between 48 and 60 million. They retained a company to look at this, and the company said, well, we think more like 40 to 44. So yeah, it was all in the ballpark. Certainly not as high as the owners initially thought. But again, what the U.S. Department of Labor is saying is that these valuations were too high, overly optimistic, and relied on growth projections for Sonnax that just weren't realistic.
That just weren't realistic. Now, comments from attorneys or from Mr. Harmon or Mr. Fritz, were you able to obtain anything there?
I haven't been able to reach anyone at Sonnax, and I have tried, and it's been several days. I haven't heard back, which is not honestly unusual in these situations. If you're being sued by the federal government, your attorney probably tells you to not talk to the press. I got in touch with First Bankers, which is that financial services company that had represented the employee stock plan, and all their president would tell me is they intend to defend these vigorously. And he expressed some frustration to me that he couldn't say more, but he said he could not.
Well, and you wonder, it seemed like, and looking at the press release, it seemed like some of the questions that the Department of Labor has to do with knowingly, deliberately overvaluing. But again, I think they could look back at this SES Capital Advisors evaluation of it as a pretty good defense. If they're saying, look, we consulted with this affiliated law firm. They said it was worth between 40 and 44 million. We had a little disagreement, but we thought it was worth more than that. I mean, you want to make money off of something. I'm not begrudging the two men who built this company trying to make money off of it at the same time, trying to create this employee stock ownership program. It seems to me that they have a lot that they could fall back on as a defense.
Yeah, the phrase that the U.S. Department of Labor used repeatedly was that Mr. Harmon and Mr. Fritz knew or should have known that these valuations were way high. And that it's because they hired these companies to do this, and it was their company that they were looking at, and they provided these projections, the growth projections. So that's the key. They knew or should have known, according to the government.
And the suit is against the two men, Harmon and Fritz, Sonnax as well, and then also First Bankers Trust. All four of them named in the lawsuit. So some people that they could ostensibly recover some damages from. I mean, what is the possible worst case scenario outcome for the defendants in this suit?
They are looking for the defendants to basically repay the losses suffered by the employee stock plan here. So, I mean, theoretically, that could be millions of dollars.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's not some sort of settlement here at some point where they figure this out and there's some kind of penalty, and, you know, Sonnax goes on being the kind of company we know them to be.
Right. That's what confused me about why Sonnax is named in the suit in addition to the two owners and in addition to First Bankers Trust. It seems like you're suing yourself to pay back yourself when I read that, right? But I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a banker. I'm just a guy like you asking questions here.
Yeah, you know, the corporate entity, you know, initially that was the entity that was owned by Harmon and Fritz. Therefore, that entity, if I'm thinking of this correctly, that entity initiated this transaction at the time. Again, there's some angles of this. It took me a while to figure it out, and I'm still not sure that I get it all.
Right.
I'm not a financial expert.
Right, and it's hard to project whether, if they do have to settle and put money back into the ESOP program, just what that means for the employee owners. But it could ostensibly mean a nice boom for those people who are involved in that shareholders program, I would imagine.
I think so, and I think what probably a lot of folks, the employees, even, you know, the local business community would hope is that there's some sort of amicable resolution here.
Yeah.
That doesn't, you know, impair a company that's been a really strong employer in Windham County.
Yeah, like most legal cases, does this basically go dark from the media now? I mean, they make the announcement, but really after this, there's not a lot to follow up on as a reporter. I
would guess that at some point there's a formal response that the defendants would file, and that certainly would be publicly available, and I think that would be interesting. Certainly, the attorneys can say a lot more than the defendants can say.
Okay, well, if there is a response, you know Mike Faher will be reporting on it, as he does for all the different outlets in the area. VTDigger.org, Reformer.com, and commonsnews.org is where you can find his byline. We'll talk about some of his other stories from the past week when we come back after the bottom of the hour news break right here on Green Mountain Mornings. Maybe it's just the 8-degree temperature outside, but it feels like a rush kind of morning. Could be because it feels like the great white north out there, doesn't it, Mike Faher?
Oh, man, I am not a Rush fan.
I got one wrong from you for once. There we go. Rush, yeah, they have their place. Retired now.
Is that right?
As a band, yeah. They just did their farewell tour. See, you don't even know.
I won't shed a tear over
You're
that.
not on top of that. All right. Well, 8 degrees outside at 23 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. We're talking with Mike Faher, reporter for VTDigger, as well as the Brattleboro Reformer and the Commons News. All those outlets pick up his reporting that originates with the VTDigger.org website, covering many things happening in southern Vermont. We were talking about the Department of Labor lawsuit against the Bellows Falls Corporation Sonnax in the previous segment, a press release that came out last week. Another press release that we both received last week with a bit of good news for a local institution. Brattleboro Memorial Hospital submitting their certificate of need and other paperwork for a $22 million modernization project, something that you talked to Stephen R. Gordon, you talked to the BMH president and CEO. This is a very necessary upgrade for the facilities at the hospital.
Yeah, it sounds that way. I should note that most of the information I got was actually from their application to the state. I hadn't had a chance to talk to Steve, but I checked in with the hospital a little bit on that. But there's a lot of information they filed up there, and it's all in support of this new 4-story expansion that they want to build. I think it sounds like the primary need is operating rooms. They've got operating rooms housed in a building that's 65 years old, and
right,
it's above a
1950.
boiler, and it gets hot in there apparently, and there's vibrations, and it's just not. They need a new space.
Yeah, they would never build operating rooms in the same way that they're built now. Just in terms of what they know about space needs and safety needs, I imagine, and things like that. Does the building of a new structure mean that other structures are going to be taken down? That was one thing I couldn't tell from the press release. Does the certificate of need talk about taking away some of the other campus facilities?
I didn't see anything about demolition or anything like this. This was to be placed near the Richards building, right in the center of the campus, and it's got a 5,000 square foot footprint. So I mean that sounds like a lot, but it's not actually when you think about it. Hence the 4 stories up.
Right.
And in fact, when I checked in with them, they indicated that they didn't anticipate a lot of disruption even during the project. I'm sure there'll be some, but it wasn't like they got to close off a portion of the campus or shut down most of the parking or anything while this is going on.
Well, parking was what I had in mind when I thought about putting a new structure up, not renovating another structure or adding new levels to, say, the Richards building or something like that, but putting a new building up wherever that's going to go is going to take up some of the parking. And parking is not exactly an easy thing to get at the hospital already.
That's true.
They didn't say the certificate of need doesn't talk anything about parking?
It does not. It does not. And that was actually one of the questions that I did ask. Do you anticipate disruptions to parking? And the answer was no.
Yeah. Temporarily or permanently, I guess would be what can you tease out from that? But this is all again one of those great stories about Ronald Reed, this phantom benefactor who basically amassed a fortune. I mean, literally a fortune, and left some of it to Brooks Memorial Library, some of it to the hospital. This is giving them a good head start on this project.
Yeah, it's such an amazing story, and I know we've all heard this story so many times, but it's so good to get a refresher on what this guy did. He lived so quietly, and just I don't think his own family even knew he had $8 million in the bank. And BMH apparently has been looking at these upgrades for a while now, 7 or 8 years. But they noted that, without that money from Ronald Reed, that $6 million, they probably wouldn't be undertaking this project right now.
$6 million from his bequest, $6 million in working capital, and then a $10 million bond.
Right.
What exactly is the ramifications of that for the taxpayer?
Well, no, it's essentially hospital borrowing.
Okay. So it's their bond.
And they'd be paying it back. I think. I'd be guessing, I think it was a 20 or 25-year repayment period that they anticipated. And they said that, with this money that they've got, they don't need to do a capital campaign or any fundraising. They can just they can get started, assuming the state okays this project.
Right. No reason to think that they wouldn't okay this project. They went through the same process when they updated the emergency department. What's the timeline for it?
They're hoping that the Green Mountain Care Board, which has to approve this, I think acts, within the next several months, and they want to get started on construction later this year, and it's something that would last through 2019.
Okay. Another story you had last Wednesday, regarding the other health institution in town, not physical health, but mental health, when we're talking about the Brattleboro retreat. This is, again, we were talking about the kind of legal loopholes and the legal hurdles that you have to clear as a reporter. Let me see if I can summarize this. The state is investigating something to do with the retreat. We don't know what it is. We can kind of conjecture. We can kind of speculate as to what it is, but we don't know for sure. We know it's coming close to an end, but we don't know if it really is coming to an end, and we don't know what the results of that investigation are going to be.
That's a really good summary. I mean, it's one of those stories that as a reporter you connect
dots.
Yeah, but
right?
I mean, I struggled with, do I write this or not? But my rationale was it had been so long, well over a year, since we'd heard anything from the state about this. And I figured, well, the Attorney General's leaving office. We're going to need a new Attorney General. It's a perfect time to ask, hey, guys, what's up with this thing?
Right.
And the fact that it was nearly finished felt like it was worth noting to me.
Now, you allude to allegations made by the former retreat employee, Thomas Joseph, about malfeasance at the retreat, right? Overcharging patients, retaining government money, which he was not entitled. But we don't know that that's exactly what the investigation is.
I think you're right. And I am careful with my phrasing when I write this.
Right.
But I think, again, like you say, connect the dots. So we've got the allegations by the former employee. We've got the state auditor's office looking at the paperwork from that former employee, referring it to the Attorney General. And then we've got the guy that talked to me as the head of the Medicaid Fraud and Residential Abuse Unit at the AG's office, right? So, I mean, I almost wrote that the AG is investigating billing practices at the retreat, and then I stopped myself because I can't sit here and 100% say that's the case.
Right.
But it certainly seems that that's what they've been looking at.
Does this all manifest itself in any kind of clarity at any point when they complete the investigation? Will the state actually say, yes, we were investigating the allegations made by the former employee, and yes, this is what our conclusions are? Will there be any transparency at any point in the process?
That's my hope, and that's my aim in asking about it, because the serious concern with these kind of things is that when you report on an investigation, criminal or otherwise, before charges are ever filed, you risk there not ever being a resolution in public and leaving that person or institution, in this case, hanging indefinitely. So I want to be sure that whenever this is resolved, however it's resolved, that the Attorney General's office goes on record and talks about it. If the retreat is cleared, we got to say that.
Yeah. And it is interesting to note that this, as a potential case, was already dismissed on the federal level, right? They had a chance to look at this. They said, nothing really to see here. The state auditor's office said, well, it's probably worth checking out, but I wonder how much that dismissal on the federal level plays into the decision-making and the investigation on the state level.
I don't know if it does necessarily, the different jurisdiction. As you say, the auditor thought there was something worth looking at there. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and I don't know how much to read into it, but I checked with the state auditor, Doug Faher, and he said, we've not been part of this investigation since the beginning. So
they basically just said, listen, if you want to, we see a reason to investigate, but they haven't necessarily had to cooperate with it in any way.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting the Attorney General's office hasn't sort of said, okay, guys, what did you see? Or let's look at this a little further. Maybe that's not the way it works, but it was interesting to me that the auditor just has stepped away from it.
Yeah. And of course, any visit with Mike Faher would not be complete unless we talked about Vermont Yankee.
Sure.
And you did have a story last Tuesday in last Tuesday's Reformer about Elizabeth Miller, who used to work for the state. She worked in Governor Shumlin's administration when he was trying to not relicense Entergy Vermont Yankee for additional time. And now she's being retained by Entergy for this sale to the North Star Group. The thing that I almost called Deb Katz of the Citizens Awareness Network to try and get more of her take on why they're concerned about this. When she talks about the dog and pony show that Entergy and North Star are creating to make this look like a really great deal for the state of Vermont, what are their concerns about it? I've read some of your reporting on it. It does sound like a good deal for the state of Vermont.
Yeah, I think Deb's main concern is that she doesn't believe, contrary to what a lot of other folks have been saying, she doesn't believe that North Star has the experience or the money to do this job. That she doesn't believe they can do what they say, what they promise. Now, that's something that the state and the NRC have to figure out over the next year or so. It's their job to look at North Star, but that's her main contention. She think. In her words, she thinks this would be one big experiment, and really, can we risk having an experiment at a nuclear power plant? That's her take.
Yeah, turning into a dirty and cheap cleanup is basically the quote that is in your story about it, which is pretty harsh accusation. I don't think anybody is disputing, including North Star, that it's a new project for them. I mean, that's kind of what they're hanging their hat on. It's like, listen, we've done these kind of things before, certainly not on this scale, right? But we think we have the capacity to do it, and certainly nobody else is stepping up to the plate.
Well, one of the things I've been careful about in my reporting, I've heard folks, not necessarily the North Star folks, but people who are advocating for them saying, oh, they've got experience in decommissioning. They do. They've got experience doing small sort of test or research reactors, and then they've got experience doing really big fossil fuel plants, bigger than Yankee. So they do have experience, but they haven't done a project like this at a nuclear reactor this size. Now, that being said, they're partnering with this company out of Paris who, has chopped up reactors all over the world, apparently. So, the team has experience.
Right.
But you have to be careful in the wording. I don't want to allow them to sort of oversell themselves a little bit.
No. And I wonder how much leverage somebody like Elizabeth Miller will really have with a new public service board. There's going to be a new head of the public service board. I think there's going to be at least one new member of the public service board. Certainly her time in the Shumlin administration, she might know some of the players here, but I can't imagine that. And, obviously this is just speculation, but we'll really have some sort of like greasing the wheels sort of effect on this in a way that if the state really has pause about this deal, or the federal government has pause about this deal, that isn't going to make a difference to them who Elizabeth Miller is.
No, I think what people are reacting to is the fact that not only was she a top Shumlin administration official, she was regulating energy issues. She was directly involved with regulating, Vermont Yankee. And here we are a year and a half after she left the administration, and now she's representing the entity that she ostensibly used to regulate. It's that revolving door sentiment. But I think you're right. So much has changed. We have a different governor now. It's a different public service commissioner. It's and I can totally see why Entergy hires Elizabeth Miller. It makes total sense if you're Entergy, right? Why wouldn't you want somebody like that in your corner?
Yeah, without a doubt. And again, though, I can also see Deb Katz's and that group's wanting to make sure it's all done above board, done transparently. And it's good that they're keeping an eye on this. This is still an issue, even though the reactor is decommissioned at this point. One last story in this morning's paper having to do with L3KEO, formerly Colmorgan, for those of us who have lived in this community for a long time, out at Exit 1 Industrial Park, shuttering that plant. So 15 jobs lost as a result?
Yeah, I was really surprised, but that's all they say they've got out there is 15. It seems like a pretty big building for 15 folks. Yeah. Maybe that was an indicator of how they were doing. So
the company itself is not going under. They're just closing down. They're Northampton based. They're still an operating company. They're just not going to operate this facility here in Brattleboro.
Yeah, they've got over 500 employees, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, even in Italy. And when I asked them yesterday, they said this was the only facility of theirs that was impacted. They chose specifically to close the Brattleboro location.
Okay.
Yeah.
And certainly when you think about, again, I like to always talk about what businesses Brattleboro or Vermont will tolerate. Defense contractors, no disrespect to the 15 employees who were there, but I hope they're able to find other jobs. But I mean, a lot of people out there aren't sorry that we don't have more defense jobs when you think about how people feel about things. And now there's a nice big 24,000 square foot facility open if anybody has a business idea, right?
Yeah, Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation owns that building, and they're going to be looking for a tenant. So if you need 24,000 square feet of space, you know who to call.
Get in touch with Adam over at the BDCC. Don't get in touch with Mike.
No.
He won't be able to help you with that.
Can't do it.
Appreciate you helping us every other Tuesday here on the show, however, Mike. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks.
And you can see his writing on VTDigger.org, Reformer.com, commonsnews.org. Back to wrap up this edition of Green Mountain Mornings right after these messages.